The announcement. The day was warm, with the sun filtering through the curtains of a bustling family dining room. Laughter, conversation, and the clinking of plates and glasses filled the air as relatives exchanged pleasantries over lunch. Amid the chatter, sitting at the head of the table, was Mark, a man known for his confidence and a commanding presence. Next to him sat Emma, his wife of 10 years. She wore a serene expression, a quiet contrast to the animated crowd around her. As the meal progressed, Mark cleared his throat, signaling his desire for attention. The room quieted down, and all eyes turned toward him. Emma looked up, her face calm, but her eyes hinted at curiosity about what he was about to say. Mark rose from his seat, his movements deliberate, as if preparing for a grand announcement. "I have something important to share," Mark began, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to make a life-altering statement. "This has been on my mind for a while, and I believe it's time to address it." Emma remained composed, her hands resting lightly on the table. The other guests exchanged glances, some leaning forward in anticipation. "I've decided to move on with my life," Mark continued, his tone tinged with self-assurance. "I found someone else, someone who makes me feel alive again. Her name is Rachel, and I've chosen to be with her. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed around the room, followed by an eerie silence. Emma's face remained unreadable, her gaze fixed on Mark. "You're doing this here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Mark smirked, mistaking her composure for weakness. "Yes, everyone deserves to know. This is a new beginning for me, and I'm not ashamed of it." Emma sat back in her chair, her calm demeanor unsettling to those around her. "If that's what you want," she replied, her voice steady, "you'll have your divorce." The murmurs around the table grew louder as relatives tried to process what had just unfolded. Emma's unflinching acceptance left them bewildered, and Mark, too, seemed taken aback by her lack of reaction. "However," Emma added, her voice now carrying a quiet authority, "there's one condition." Mark, who had expected tears or perhaps an argument, raised an eyebrow. "Condition? What condition?" Emma leaned forward slightly, her calm eyes locking onto his. "When we part ways, you will never contact me again. No visits, no calls, no letters. You will be out of my life for good." Her words struck Mark like a whip. He had anticipated drama, perhaps even a plea for reconciliation, but not this unwavering determination. "Are you serious?" he asked, trying to mask his surprise. "Completely," Emma replied. "If you want to move on, then truly move on. I'll do the same." The weight of her words silenced the room once more. Mark, now visibly unsettled, stammered, "Fine, if that's what you want." Emma gave a faint smile, one that was neither bitter nor defeated, but resolute. She rose from her seat and excused herself, leaving the room in stunned silence. Later that evening, Emma sat in her quiet living room, sipping tea as she reflected on the day's events. Her close friend, Clara, arrived shortly after, her face etched with concern. "How are you holding up?" Clara asked, sitting beside Emma. Emma set her cup down and smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Better than I thought I'd be." Clara shook her head in disbelief. "He humiliated you in front of everyone. How are you not falling apart?" Emma paused, her gaze distant. "Falling apart would give him power over me. He made his choice, Clara. Now I'm making mine." Clara reached for her friend's hand, squeezing it gently. "You're stronger than I could ever be." "It's not about strength," Emma said, her voice soft but firm. "It's about survival." Meanwhile, across town, Mark was sitting in his new apartment with Rachel. The initial excitement of their relationship had started to fade, replaced by a nagging unease. Rachel noticed his restlessness and tried to comfort him, but her efforts were half-hearted. "Why do you care so much about her reaction?" Rachel asked, scrolling through her phone. "She's out of your life now." Mark frowned. his mind replaying Emma's composed response. "Because it wasn't what I expected," he admitted. "She didn't cry or beg. She just agreed." Rachel shrugged. Maybe she was relieved. The possibility gnawed at Mark. For years, he had prided himself on being in control, on shaping the narrative of his life. But Emma's quiet strength had disrupted his expectations, leaving him feeling unmoored. Over the next few days, the ripples of Mark's announcement continued to spread. Emma's family and friends rallied around her, offering support and encouragement. But Emma, true to her nature, maintained her composure. She threw herself into her work, her hobbies, and her plans for the future, determined to rebuild her life on her terms. Her calm exterior, however, masked the quiet storm within. At night, when the world was still, Emma allowed herself to feel the weight of the betrayal, the ache of being discarded by someone she had trusted. But even in those moments, she reminded herself of her own worth. "I won't let this define me," she whispered to herself one evening. "I'll rise above it." Unbeknownst to Emma, Mark was beginning to unravel. The life he had envisioned with Rachel was not the dream he had hoped for. Tensions grew between them, and Mark found himself longing for the stability and warmth he had once taken for granted. Late one night, as he lay awake in his empty apartment, Mark picked up his phone and stared at Emma's number. A pang of regret pierced his chest, but his pride kept him from dialing. For the first time, he realized that the life he had so confidently walked away from might have been the best thing he'd ever had. The stage was set for a confrontation neither of them could have predicted, and as their paths prepared to cross once more, the question lingered: would the wounds of the past lead to redemption, or would they deepen beyond repair? The cracks began to show. The days turned into weeks, and Emma found herself rediscovering parts of herself that had long been overshadowed by her life with Mark. Her mornings began with long walks through the neighborhood, the cool air brushing her face, reminding her of the world outside the bubble she had once lived in. She poured her energy into work, where her creativity seemed to flourish in ways it hadn't for years. Colleagues noticed her newfound focus and calm demeanor. "Whatever you're doing, keep at it," her manager, Angela, remarked one afternoon. Emma merely smiled, knowing her peace came not from an absence of pain, but from choosing not to dwell in it. At home, Emma began rearranging the furniture. She painted the living room a soft shade of blue, a color she had always wanted, but Mark had dismissed as too feminine. She planted flowers in the garden, bright marigolds and daisies, that seemed to reflect her growing sense of self. The house felt lighter, freer, as if it were shedding the weight of the past along with her. But despite her progress, nights were still difficult. Alone with her thoughts, Emma would sometimes replay the moments leading up to Mark's announcement. The words, so carelessly spoken, still stung. "I found someone else," he had said, as though she were nothing more than a placeholder. She wondered if the pain would ever truly fade, but she reminded herself of the promise she had made, to live on her terms and not let the betrayal define her. Meanwhile, Mark's new life with Rachel was not the utopia he had envisioned. At first, things seemed perfect. Rachel was vibrant, spontaneous, and everything Emma was not. At least, that's what he told himself. They spent evenings at trendy restaurants and weekends at luxury resorts, flaunting their relationship like a trophy. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. One evening, Mark returned to their apartment to find Rachel on the phone, her voice low and conspiratorial. When she noticed him, she quickly ended the call, offering only a dismissive explanation. "Just a work thing," she said, brushing past him. Mark's gut tightened. He didn't press further, but the unease lingered. As the days passed, Rachel's absences became more frequent. She stayed late at the office, canceled dinner plans, and seemed increasingly distant. One night, over an awkwardly silent dinner, Mark finally asked, "Is everything okay?" Rachel didn't look up from her plate. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" "You've been different lately," Mark said, choosing his words carefully. I feel like you're not here anymore. Rachel sighed, setting her fork down. Mark, I'm here. Don't start imagining things. But her tone was sharp, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He tried to dismiss it, telling himself he was overthinking. Yet, deep down, he knew Rachel's spark, the very thing that had drawn him to her, was fading. While Mark grappled with his crumbling relationship, Emma's world continued to expand. She started taking art classes, something she had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. The instructor, a kind man in his 50s named Jonathan, encouraged her to explore her emotions through her work. One evening, as Emma painted a serene landscape, Jonathan approached her. You have a gift for capturing stillness, he said, his voice warm. It's as if you're painting peace itself. Emma smiled, surprised by the compliment. I guess I'm trying to find that peace in myself, she admitted. Jonathan nodded. You're doing better than you think. The class became a sanctuary for Emma, a place where she could channel her emotions into something beautiful. With each stroke of the brush, she felt a little more of the pain lift, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. Back in Mark's world, things were unraveling faster than he could control. At work, his employees treated him with thinly veiled contempt. Whispers followed him down hallways, and he often caught furtive glances exchanged when he entered a room. One afternoon, as he reviewed a report, his assistant, Claire, knocked hesitantly on the door. Come in, Mark said, not looking up. Claire stepped inside, her expression nervous. Sir, there's something I think you should know. Mark set his pen down and gestured for her to continue. It's about Rachel, Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. She's been spending time with Carl. Mark's heart stopped. Carl was one of his senior managers, a charming but insubordinate employee who had always tested Mark's patience. What do you mean? Mark asked, his voice low and dangerous. Claire hesitated. I've seen them together outside the office. They seem close. Mark dismissed her, his mind racing. That evening, he confronted Rachel. Are you seeing Carl? He demanded, his voice shaking with barely restrained anger. Rachel didn't deny it. Instead, she laughed, a cold, dismissive laugh that cut through him like a blade. Are you really surprised? She said, her tone dripping with disdain. You left your wife for me, Mark. What made you think I wouldn't do the same to you? The words hit him like a punch to the gut. For the first time, Mark saw Rachel for who she truly was, not the vibrant, exciting woman he had imagined, but someone who had used him as a stepping stone. That night, Mark sat alone in the darkened apartment, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He thought of Emma, her calm, her dignity, the way she had accepted the divorce without a fight. For years, he had taken her strength for granted, dismissing it as passivity. But now he saw it for what it was, resilience. For the first time, Mark felt the full impact of his actions. He had traded a life of stability and love for an illusion, and now he was left with nothing. Desperate for some semblance of comfort, Mark picked up his phone and dialed Emma's number. The phone rang once, twice, and then she answered. Hello. Emma's voice was calm, just as he remembered. Mark hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. It's me, he finally managed. Mark. There was a pause on the other end, and then Emma spoke, her tone unreadable. What do you want? I needed to hear your voice, Mark admitted, his voice trembling. Emma, I've made so many mistakes. I don't know where else to turn. Emma's silence was deafening. When she finally spoke, her words were measured and firm. Mark, you made your choice. You don't get to come back and ask for comfort now. I know, Mark said, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm sorry, Emma, for everything. Emma sighed, the sound heavy with emotion. Sorry doesn't fix what's broken, Mark. It doesn't erase the pain you caused. The conversation ended shortly after, leaving Mark alone once more. But this time, he wasn't just alone. He was haunted by the realization that he had destroyed the best thing he'd ever had. As the days passed, Mark's regret grew, but Emma continued to move forward. She had no intention of looking back. Her life, though scared, was hers again, and she was determined to make it beautiful. The unyielding tide. The days following Mark's call were an emotional whirlpool for Emma. She had anticipated that Mark might reach out eventually, but hearing his voice after so long stirred memories she had worked so hard to bury. The man who had discarded her so casually now seemed broken, lost, and desperate. For a fleeting moment, she felt a pang of sympathy. But it was fleeting. Emma reminded herself of everything she had endured. The humiliation, the betrayal, the quiet nights spent wondering what she had done to deserve such treatment. She refused to let Mark's remorse derail the progress she had made. Her resolve hardened, and she chose not to dwell on the past. Instead, Emma immersed herself in her newfound passions. The art classes she attended became a highlight of her week. Jonathan, her instructor, continued to encourage her, often pointing out the depth of emotion in her work. One evening, Jonathan lingered after class to look over her latest painting, a vivid depiction of a stormy sea under a turbulent sky. The waves were wild and chaotic, yet there was a strange serenity in the way the light broke through the clouds. "This is incredible," Jonathan said, his voice filled with admiration. "It feels alive, like it's telling a story." Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe it is." "Are you planning to exhibit your work?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "Exhibit? No, I don't think I'm ready for that." "You're more ready than you realize," Jonathan replied. "Think about it. You have something worth sharing." His words stayed with Emma long after the class ended. For the first time, she entertained the idea of showcasing her work to the world, a bold step she never would have considered in her previous life. Across town, Mark was spiraling. Rachel had officially ended their relationship, leaving him with nothing but a half-empty apartment and a growing sense of regret. His professional life was no better. The whispers among his employees had turned into open disdain, and his once thriving business was beginning to falter. Clients were withdrawing contracts, citing poor communication and dissatisfaction with the company's direction. Mark spent his nights pacing the apartment, his mind racing with thoughts of Emma. He replayed their conversation, her calm yet firm words cutting deeper than any anger ever could. She was right. He had made his choice, and he had to live with it. But living with it felt unbearable. One morning, Mark decided to drive past their old house. He hadn't been there since the divorce, and seeing it again was like a punch to the gut. The garden was blooming with vibrant flowers he didn't recognize, and the house itself seemed brighter, more welcoming. It was as though Emma had breathed new life into the place, erasing every trace of him. Mark parked across the street, watching as Emma stepped outside. She was dressed casually, carrying a basket of freshly cut flowers. There was a lightness in her step, a glow about her that he barely recognized. She looked happy. Mark sat frozen in his car, a mix of longing and regret washing over him. He wanted to approach her, to say something, anything, but he knew he had no right. Instead, he drove away. The image of Emma's serene face burned into his memory. Emma, unaware of Mark's brief visit, continued to thrive. One afternoon, she received a call from Jonathan. "I submitted one of your paintings to the upcoming local art exhibit," he said excitedly. "It's the stormy sea piece. You know, the one that feels alive." Emma was stunned. "You what?" "I didn't think you'd mind," Jonathan said, his tone unapologetic. "You've got real talent, Emma. People deserve to see it." At first, Emma was hesitant. The idea of putting her work on display felt vulnerable, like opening a door to a part of herself she wasn't sure she wanted others to see. But Jonathan's confidence in her was contagious, and eventually, she agreed to participate. The weeks leading up to the exhibit were a whirlwind of preparation. Emma found herself nervous but excited, a combination of emotions she hadn't felt in years. The thought of standing in a room filled with people admiring her work was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the day of the exhibit approached, word began to spread among their mutual acquaintances. Even Mark heard about it, though he wasn't sure if attending would be welcome or wise. His curiosity, however, got the better of him. He wanted to see what Emma had created, to understand the part of her he had overlooked for so long. When the day finally arrived, the gallery buzzed with excitement. Emma stood near her painting, dressed elegantly but simply, her hair pulled back in a way that framed her face. She greeted visitors with a warm smile, her confidence growing with every kind word she received about her work. Mark entered the gallery cautiously, unsure of what to expect. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Emma. For a moment, he just watched her, taking in the way she moved, the way she smiled at everyone who approached her. She seemed radiant, a far cry from the woman he had left behind. Eventually, Mark mustered the courage to approach. Emma spotted him before he could say anything, her expression unreadable. "Mark," she said, her tone polite but distant. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I heard about the exhibit," he replied, his voice low. "I wanted to see your work." Emma gestured toward her painting, her demeanor calm. "It's right there." Mark turned to look at the stormy sea, its wild waves and turbulent sky reflecting a raw, untamed energy. It was breathtaking, yet unsettling. "It's incredible," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "It feels like there's a story behind it." Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the painting. "There is." Mark hesitated, then said, "Emma, I need to say this. I'm sorry. For everything. For what I did to you, for how I treated you, for all of it." Emma turned to face him, her expression steady. "Mark, I've heard your apology before, but this isn't about forgiveness. It's about moving forward." "I know," Mark said, his voice breaking. "But seeing you like this, seeing what you've created, it makes me realize how much I lost when I lost you." Emma's gaze softened, but she didn't waver. "You didn't lose me, Mark. You let me go. And I found myself in the process." Her words hung in the air, carrying a finality that Mark couldn't argue with. He nodded slowly, realizing that no amount of regret could undo the past. As Mark walked away, Emma turned back to her painting. She felt a sense of closure, not because Mark had apologized, but because she had reclaimed her power. The stormy sea on the canvas wasn't just a reflection of her pain. It was a testament to her resilience. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. The road to redemption. The gallery buzzed with life, the energy of admiration and curiosity filling the space as visitors wandered from painting to painting. Emma remained composed, exchanging warm smiles and answering questions about her art. Her interaction with Mark lingered in her mind, not as a wound reopened, but as a door she had finally shut. For her, closure wasn't about vengeance or pity. It was about standing tall in the face of what once broke her. As the evening wore on, Jonathan approached her with a glass of sparkling water. "You're a hit," he said, nodding toward the small crowd gathered around her painting of the stormy sea. Emma smiled, the glow of accomplishment lighting her features. "I didn't think it would feel this good," she admitted. "But it does." Jonathan raised his glass in a mock toast. "To the artist who doesn't realize how brilliant she is." Emma laughed softly, grateful for his unwavering belief in her. "Thank you for pushing me. I never would have done this without you." "You didn't need me," Jonathan replied. "You just needed to believe in yourself." For Mark, the gallery visit had been a sobering experience. Driving home, he couldn't shake the image of Emma standing beside her painting, radiating confidence and strength. It was a stark contrast to the woman he had dismissed as meek and unremarkable. Regret clawed at him, but more than that, there was a gnawing realization. Emma had always been extraordinary. He had simply been too blinded by his own ego to see it. Back in his empty apartment, Mark sat at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of whiskey. The memories of his life with Emma played like a film reel in his mind. Her laughter as they danced in the living room, her gentle encouragement during his low moments, her unwavering support even when he didn't deserve it. He had traded all of that for Rachel, a decision he now saw as the greatest mistake of his life. Rachel's betrayal felt like a cruel twist of fate, but deep down, Mark knew he had no one to blame but himself. Determined to make amends, Mark began taking steps to rebuild his life. He reached out to his estranged family, apologizing for years of neglect. He started therapy, a humbling experience that forced him to confront his flaws and take responsibility for his actions. But more than anything, Mark wanted to earn Emma's forgiveness, not to rekindle their relationship, but to give her the closure she deserved. He didn't want to be the shadow lingering over her newfound happiness. Meanwhile, Emma's life continued to flourish. The success of the art exhibit opened doors she never imagined. She received invitations to participate in other shows, and her paintings began to sell, each one a piece of her journey finding its way into the world. One evening, as she sorted through her mail, she came across a letter with familiar handwriting. It was from Mark. She hesitated, the envelope heavy in her hands. Part of her wanted to toss it aside, to let the past remain in the past. But curiosity won out, and she opened it. The letter was heartfelt and raw, a stark contrast to the Mark she had known. Dear Emma, I don't know if this letter will mean anything to you, but I had to write it. Seeing you at the gallery the other night made me realize just how much I failed to appreciate you. You've grown into someone incredible, someone I can only admire from a distance now. I want to say that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not just for the way I ended our marriage, but for the way I took you for granted. You gave me everything. Your love, your support, your trust, and I threw it away. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I hope you know that I see now what I was too blind to see before. You are extraordinary, Emma, and I was a fool to let you go. Thank you for showing me, even in your absence, what it means to be strong. I'm working to be a better person, not for you, not for anyone else, but because I owe it to myself. I hope that one day, if we cross paths again, I can show you the version of me that you always believed I could be. Take care, Emma. You deserve every bit of happiness this world has to offer. Mark. Emma read the letter twice, her emotions a mixture of sadness, anger, and closure. She didn't feel the need to respond. The letter wasn't for her. It was for Mark, a step in his journey toward redemption. She folded the letter and tucked it away in a drawer, not as a memento of pain, but as a reminder of how far she had come. Months passed, and Emma's life continued to evolve. She expanded her art into teaching, hosting small workshops for aspiring artists in her community. The workshops brought her a sense of purpose as she shared her journey and encouraged others to find healing through creativity. One day, after a particularly fulfilling class, Emma received a call from Jonathan. "Have you checked your email?" he asked, his voice brimming with excitement. "No. Why?" Emma replied, wiping paint from her hands. "There's a gallery in New York interested in showcasing your work," Jonathan said. "They saw your painting at the exhibit and want to feature you in a solo show." Emma's breath caught. A solo show in New York. It felt like a dream too big to grasp. "That's incredible," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "But can I really do this?" "You can," Jonathan said firmly. "And you will." The following months were a whirlwind of preparation, as Emma worked tirelessly to create new pieces for the show. Each painting reflected a chapter of her life. The pain, the healing, the triumph. By the time the gallery opening arrived, Emma felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The New York exhibit was a resounding success. Critics praised her work for its emotional depth and raw beauty, and Emma found herself standing in the center of a world she had once only dreamed of. As she looked around the bustling gallery, surrounded by strangers who had been moved by her art, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for her success, but for the journey that had brought her here. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it had all led her to this moment. She didn't need validation from anyone, least of all Mark. She had found her worth within herself, and it was more than enough. Mark, now living a quieter life, read about Emma's success in an online article. He smiled, a bittersweet feeling settling over him. He knew he had lost her for good, but he was proud of her nonetheless. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with the past. Emma's story wasn't just one of survival, it was one of transformation. She had taken the wreckage of her life and built something beautiful, proving that even the darkest storms could lead to brighter horizons. The echo of choices. David sat alone in the quiet of his study, his once pristine desk now cluttered with papers he couldn't bring himself to organize. The late-night silence, usually his favorite time for reflection, had become a torment. It had been months since the divorce, months since he had last seen Helen. At first he had felt victorious, basking in the newfound freedom with Jessica. But now his life felt like a crumbling facade, each crack exposing the emptiness beneath. Jessica was gone. The woman for whom he had appended his life had left without a backward glance, choosing someone else, someone younger, richer, more exciting. The betrayal felt like a slap, but it also opened his eyes. He realized he had been chasing illusions of power, control, and a perfect life. But what did he have now? A hollow house, fractured relationships, and a reputation diminished to whispers and mocking laughter in the halls of his office. The echo of his choices haunted him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to think about Helen. Truly think about her, not as the wife he had dismissed, but as the woman he had once vowed to cherish. He thought of her calm strength in the face of his betrayal, her unwavering dignity when he humiliated her in front of everyone. She had not screamed or begged. She had simply let him go. That composure, which had once irritated him, now felt like a rebuke. He reached for his phone and hesitated. Her number was still there, untouched but etched in his memory. He stared at the screen, debating whether to call. What would he even say? Would she answer, or had she erased him from her life as she had promised? Finally, he dialed. The ringing on the other end felt interminable, each tone a reminder of the distance he had placed between them. Just as he was about to hang up, her voice came through. Hello. It was calm, unyielding, the same voice that had dismantled his arrogance months ago. Helen, he began, his voice faltering. It's me, David. There was a pause, but she didn't hang up. What do you want? She asked, her tone neutral, devoid of warmth or malice. I don't know where to start, he admitted, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. I've been thinking about you, about everything. I owe you an apology. Her silence on the other end was deafening, but it compelled him to continue. I was wrong, Helen, he said, his voice cracking. I was selfish, cruel, and blind to what I had. I didn't see you, not really. And I threw away the best thing in my life for nothing. Helen exhaled softly, and he could imagine her standing by her window, looking out at the night, the way she always did when she needed to think. David, she began, her voice measured, do you think an apology changes anything? Do you believe it erases the nights I cried myself to sleep or the humiliation you so carelessly inflicted on me? No, he said quickly, his hands trembling. I know it doesn't, but I need you to know I see it now. I see what I did to you, to us. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her laugh was quiet, almost bitter. You're sorry now that everything has fallen apart. But where was this remorse when you stood in front of our family and declared your love for someone else? Where was it when I was left to pick up the pieces of the life we built together? David had no answer. Her words cut through him, leaving him exposed, vulnerable. I don't hate you, David, she said finally, her voice softening. I've moved past that. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back to what was. I've rebuilt my life. one piece at a time. I won't let you undo that. I'm not asking for that, he said, desperate to hold on to the thread of the conversation. I need you to know that I understand now. I was wrong, and I regret everything. Regret, she repeated, the word heavy with meaning. Regret is a powerful thing, David, but it's also yours to bear, not mine. I've carried enough pain for the both of us. The line fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. I hope you find peace, Helen said at last. But you won't find it in me. Before he could respond, the call ended. David sat in the silence, the finality of her words sinking in. Helen, on the other side of town, placed her phone on the table and stared out the window. The moon hung low in the sky, its light casting a gentle glow over her garden. She felt a mixture of emotions, sadness, relief, and a quiet sense of triumph. She had faced the man who once broke her and emerged stronger, her dignity intact. David's apology had come too late, but it had given her something unexpected: closure. As she turned off the light and headed to bed, she knew one thing for certain. Her story was hers to write, and she was finally free to live it on her terms. The weight of consequences. David sat in the empty room for what felt like hours after the call ended. The silence pressed against him, reminding him of the void he had created in his life. He replayed Helen's words over and over, each syllable a hammer striking at the foundation of the man he thought he was. He had always been in control, or so he believed. Control over his career, his image, his relationships. But now, stripped of everything, he realized how fragile that control had been. It had been an illusion, bolstered by the power he held over others. Helen's composure, her ability to walk away with her dignity intact, shattered that illusion. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass as his thoughts spiraled. The memories came unbidden, moments he had dismissed, moments he now saw in a different light. Helen's quiet support during his worst days at work, her unwavering belief in him when he doubted himself, the small, unnoticed gestures of love that he had taken for granted. They were gone now, and he wondered if he had ever truly appreciated them. But regret wasn't enough. He knew that. Words couldn't rebuild what he had destroyed. And yet he felt compelled to try, if only for his own peace of mind. David resolved to take one step, an action, not just a plea. He needed to show Helen that he understood the gravity of his mistakes, even if it changed nothing. The next day, David arrived at the family law office to finalize the lingering paperwork from the divorce. The receptionist looked up with a faint, polite smile that quickly faded when she saw his haggard appearance. "Mr. Reynolds, your attorney will be with you shortly," she said, gesturing to the waiting area. David nodded, sinking into one of the plush chairs. He stared at the paperwork on the table before him, the legalese blurring together as he struggled to focus. He thought about the wealth he had accumulated, the possessions he once valued so highly. What did they mean now, without someone to share them with? The thought gnawed at him as he signed each document, his hand trembling slightly. When the meeting concluded, he hesitated outside the building, clutching the manila envelope containing the final papers. He thought of Helen, of her quiet strength. What could he possibly do to make things right? Nothing, he realized, could undo the past. But perhaps he could leave her with a final gesture, a symbol of his understanding, his remorse. That evening, Helen was sitting by the window in her small but cozy home, sipping a cup of tea. The garden she had painstakingly nurtured over the past few months was in full bloom, a riot of colors that brought her a sense of peace. She had moved on in many ways, but David's call lingered in her mind. It wasn't the words that affected her, but the vulnerability in his voice. It was a stark contrast to the man she had known, arrogant, dismissive, always in control. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She set her cup down and walked to the door, her steps measured. When she opened it, she was surprised to see David standing there, holding a large envelope and a small, carefully wrapped box. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone more curious than angry. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quickly, sensing her guard go up. I need to give you this. Then I'll leave. I promise." Helen hesitated before stepping aside to let him in. He placed the items on the coffee table, standing awkwardly as she sat down. "What's this?" she asked, gesturing to the envelope. David took a deep breath. "It's the final paperwork for the divorce. But there's more. I've signed over the house to you. I know it doesn't make up for anything, but it's yours. You deserve to have something to show for all the years you put into us." Helen's expression remained neutral as she opened the envelope, scanning the documents. It was true. The deed to the house was now in her name, no strings attached. She glanced at him, trying to discern his motives. "And the box?" she asked. He hesitated, his hands fidgeting nervously. It's something I should have given you a long time ago." Helen unwrapped the box carefully, revealing a photo album. As she flipped through its pages, she saw pictures from their early years together, moments she had cherished but thought were forgotten. There were handwritten notes beside each photo, detailing his memories of those times. Some were happy, others bittersweet, but all were honest. "I know this doesn't change anything," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I wanted you to know that I remember. And I regret not cherishing those moments when I had the chance." Helen closed the album gently, her fingers lingering on the cover. She looked up at David, her expression unreadable. "Why now?" "Because I finally see what I lost," he said simply. "And I needed you to know that I understand, even if it's too late." She studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. "It is too late, David, but I appreciate the gesture." He nodded, accepting her words with quiet resignation. "Thank you for letting me say this." Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Helen alone with the album and the documents. She sat there for a long time, the weight of his actions and her own choices settling over her. As the night deepened, she placed the album on the shelf and returned to her tea. The past, she realized, would always be a part of her, but she also knew that she had the strength to move forward, unburdened by the pain David had caused. His apology, though late, was a step toward healing, not for their relationship, but for herself. And that was enough. A new chapter. The following months brought a quiet but profound transformation in Helen's life. The house, now solely hers, felt less like a reminder of the past and more like a blank canvas. Every room she walked into seemed to ask her the same question: "What do you want to create here?" For the first time in years, the answer belonged entirely to her. Helen began with the garden, a space she had always loved, but never fully dedicated herself to. She spent her mornings outdoors, her hands deep in the soil, planting rows of vibrant flowers and fragrant herbs. The act of nurturing something from the ground up felt symbolic. She was rebuilding her life, one seed at a time. Neighbors passing by often stopped to admire her work, their casual compliments reminding her that she wasn't invisible, that she was seen and appreciated in ways David never managed to show. One afternoon, as she tended to the roses, a familiar voice called out from the street, "Helen, those look amazing." She looked up to see her old friend Martha, holding a basket of fresh-baked bread. "I thought you might like some company," Martha said with a grin. Helen smiled warmly. "I could use a break. Come on in." They settled on the patio, the scent of blooming lavender wafting through the air. Martha placed the basket on the table, her gaze sweeping across the garden. "You've really outdone yourself. It's beautiful." "Thank you," Helen said, pouring them each a glass of iced tea. "It's been therapeutic. There's something healing about watching things grow." Martha nodded, her expression turning thoughtful. "You seem different, Helen. Happier. Lighter, even." Helen looked out at the garden, her mind reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "I think I'd finally let go," she said softly. "Of the anger, the pain, the need for closure. It doesn't mean I've forgotten, but it no longer controls me." Martha reached across the table, and squeezed Helen's hand. "I'm proud of you. It takes real strength to find peace after everything you've been through." Helen smiled, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. Strength comes in unexpected ways. Sometimes it's just choosing to wake up and start again. David, meanwhile, was living a life he never thought he'd experience, a life of solitude. The spacious house he had once shared with Jessica felt cavernous, the silence oppressive. He spent his days throwing himself into work, hoping to distract himself from the void. But the whispers at the office, the knowing looks from his colleagues, reminded him that his reputation had suffered a blow he might never fully recover from. In the evenings, he found himself revisiting old memories, not out of regret alone, but out of a longing to understand where he had gone wrong. He replayed Helen's words from their last conversation, her composure a stark contrast to his desperation. Her strength unsettled him, but it also inspired him. One night, as he stared at the unfinished drink on his desk, he made a decision. He had spent enough time wallowing in self-pity. If he couldn't undo the past, he could at least ensure that his future wasn't defined by the same mistakes. David signed up for a counseling program, a step he had once dismissed as unnecessary. Talking to a professional forced him to confront truths he had long ignored. His need for control, his inability to appreciate the people in his life, and the deep-seated insecurities that had driven him to sabotage his marriage. It wasn't an easy journey, but for the first time, he felt he was taking responsibility for his actions. Helen's life continued to blossom, much like her garden. She began teaching part-time at a local community center, offering classes in creative writing, a passion she had set aside during her years with David. The classes became a source of joy, not just for her, but for the students who found a mentor in Helen. One evening, after a particularly lively class, a man approached her as she packed up her materials. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, and an easy smile that put her at ease. "Great class tonight," he said, holding out his hand. "I'm James. My daughter's in your class. She couldn't stop talking about your feedback on her story." Helen shook his hand, smiling warmly. "She's a talented writer. I'm glad to see her taking an interest in storytelling." James nodded, his gaze lingering on her. "You seem to have a knack for inspiring people. I was wondering if I could take you to dinner sometime, just as a thank you for encouraging her." Helen hesitated, caught off guard by the invitation. It had been so long since anyone had shown interest in her as more than a wife, a teacher, or a neighbor. But as she looked into James's kind eyes, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. "I'd like that," she said finally, her smile widening. Months passed, and Helen's world grew richer with every new experience. Her friendship with James deepened, though she took things slowly, allowing herself the space to heal and rediscover who she was outside of any relationship. The support of her friends, her newfound independence, and her creative pursuits gave her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known was possible. David, on the other hand, continued his path of self-discovery. He had started volunteering at a local shelter, a small but meaningful way to give back. It didn't erase his mistakes, but it reminded him that he could still make a positive impact. One day, as he walked past a bookstore, he noticed a poster in the window advertising a reading by a local author. The name caught his eye. Helen. He stepped inside, his curiosity outweighing his apprehension. The room was filled with people, all eagerly listening as Helen read from her latest piece. She stood at the front, her voice steady, her presence commanding. David watched from the back, his heart heavy with both pride and sorrow. When the reading ended, he considered approaching her, but decided against it. This was her space, her moment, and he had no right to intrude. He left the bookstore quietly, knowing that he had witnessed something extraordinary. A woman who had risen from the ashes of their broken marriage to become something greater than he had ever imagined. Helen's journey was far from over, but she no longer feared the unknown. She had learned that life wasn't about avoiding pain, but embracing the lessons it brought. As she sat in her garden one evening, The sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. The future, she realized, was hers to create. A new chapter filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of endless possibilities. A peaceful resolution. Helen closed the book she had been reading, letting the soft breeze of the evening caress her face. The garden she had poured so much of herself into was alive with color and fragrance, a symbol of the life she had rebuilt. The distant hum of laughter from neighbors and the chirping of crickets filled the air, blending into a symphony of contentment. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea, when her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name. David. For a moment, she hesitated. She had thought their last conversation had been the final chapter between them. Still, curiosity and a lingering sense of closure prompted her to answer. "Hello," she said, her voice steady. "Helen." David began, his tone different this time. Softer. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You're not," she replied, though her guard was still up. "What is it, David?" "I just wanted to thank you," he said, surprising her. "Not just for taking my call before, but for everything. For being the person you were, even when I didn't deserve it. And for walking away when you did. I didn't understand it then, but now I see it. You saved yourself, and in some strange way, you saved me too." Helen listened, her emotions a complex mixture of surprise, sympathy, and relief. She didn't interrupt, letting him speak. "I've been working on myself," he continued. "I've been in therapy, volunteering, trying to be better. I don't expect anything from you, not forgiveness, not friendship. I just needed to tell you that you've been an inspiration to me, even if it's far too late." There was a pause, a silence filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, Helen spoke, her voice calm yet firm. "David, I'm glad to hear that you're working on yourself, and I hope you find peace. But I've moved on. My life is no longer tied to what we had or what we lost. I wish you well, but this is where our paths truly part." David exhaled audibly, a sound of acceptance rather than disappointment. "I understand. Thank you, Helen, for everything." She ended the call and sat in the quiet, letting the moment settle. It felt final, but in the best way. A weight lifted, a door gently closed. For the first time, she felt no anger, no resentment, only peace. In the weeks that followed, Helen continued to thrive. Her writing classes expanded, and her work was published in a respected journal. James, ever patient and kind, became a steadfast presence in her life. They shared meals, long walks, and quiet evenings, building something based on mutual respect and understanding. One evening, as they walked through her garden, James paused and took her hand. "You know," he said, "you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You inspire me." Helen smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, James, but I've learned that strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing when to let others in." They stood in the twilight, the world around them bathed in a golden glow. For Helen, it wasn't just another moment. It was a promise, a testament to her journey from heartbreak to healing, from loss to love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Helen realized something profound. Life didn't just move on. It flourished when you allowed it to. And for the first time in years, she was ready to embrace everything it had to offer.